Hello and welcome to the Birth Untethered podcast. I'm Shellie, a long-time doula, advocate and former university lecturer.
And I'm Kemi, a badass birth keeper, formerly a UK registered midwife.
Just a couple of rebels with decades of combined experience in pregnancy, birth and beyond getting together to share wisdom. We exist to equip birth workers, families and seekers of truth with informed choice, not fear. Come as you are, learn what they don't teach. This is the birth revolution and you're all invited. Hello everybody and welcome to this episode of the Birth Untethered podcast with me, Shellie and Kemi. And this is episode 2 of the podcast, the official episode 2, and it's a continuation, much like we see between pregnancy, between labour, between birth, between slipping into parenting. And as we were just laughing about before we came on podcast, that, you know, parenting never ends. It's a continuation for the rest of your life. So you don't
till you're 6 foot under.
you don't get rid of them when they're 18. Not that you'd want to, but I don't know.
Or
some of them
scattered into your favourite place.
Yeah. So this is a continuation of that discussion about physiological birth, about what's happening. We're kind of delving into research about what's happening. We're delving into the emotion of how it feels. We're delving into when things are not fiddled with, what's likely to happen, and also when things are fiddled with, our understanding of what's happening or lack thereof, you know, because we don't know everything yet. You know, there's always new knowledge and new information coming up, and we're always learning and researching more. And actually that ties in to something I said in the previous podcast episode, you know, and Kemi and I are big birth nerds, as you know, and we just cannot stop learning about stuff and sharing that with you. And I said that the oxytocin peak that you get at the end of labour is significantly higher than an orgasm, but I wasn't sure how much higher, so I actually went away and did a bit of a diving into orgasms. That's what I've been doing late at night, ladies and gentlemen. Is that an overshare?
Ladies and gentlemen.
I've just done some excellent, important research for you all.
Really good research. Really thorough, Shellie.
Yeah, it was very thorough research. So what we found out is that when you have an orgasm, what it produces is a doubling of your plasma oxytocin levels. So you have a baseline of about 2.1 PGs per milliliter. And when you have an orgasm, you get this one big surge, if you have one orgasm, of up to 4.6. So it goes from 2.1 to 4.6. You get a doubling from your baseline level. Now, as we get those changes in that continuation leading up to labour and leading up to labour initiating, things starting, things ticking over, things bubbling over, things tipping the scale, which is what we're getting, this kind of balance that just gradually tips over into labour. And in early labour, you already have a plasma level of 26 PGs per mil. So you're already on that oxytocin train, and you get raising levels of oxytocin throughout labour that are increasing, and it's one system in the body. I don't know actually if there are any other positive feedback loop systems, because most feedback mechanisms in the body are negative feedbacks. So what, for example, you drink a glass of water, okay, your body absorbs that fluid through your digestive tract, and what it does is it increases your blood volume level. Obviously, you've got liquid, it comes in, increases your blood volume level. This increases your blood pressure. This triggers a cascade of things to happen, your kidneys to become more permeable to things, and so you then wee out. Goes through the kidneys into the bladder, and you wee out. So then balance your blood pressure back down again, that shift, that change. So the body is always trying to maintain homeostasis. It likes things to be on an even keel. It's stressful for it to be out of balance in that way, and being out of balance causes problems. You know, we see that with diabetes, you know, where our sugar levels are too high, it starts to cause issues. It starts to cause damage to our cells, to our mitochondria, to structures in our body. But with labour, we're getting this oxytocin feedback loop, and it's a positive feedback loop. So it's continually trying to increase itself. So you get oxytocin release, you have got this increased sensitivity in the oxytocin receptors in the uterus, which cause the contractions. The contraction causes a specific feedback mechanism loop through the nervous system, through a particular nervous pathway, which then triggers more oxytocin release in the brain, which then increases more contractions, and so on and so forth. And with that increasing feedback loop throughout labour, you get to going from 26 in early labour in the blood levels to 74 in the blood levels. And sometimes we've got peaks where it's being released rhythmically from the brain in relation to contractions. You get sometimes peaks over 100, levels of over 100, depending on the timing of when it's being measured. And it's 10 to 20 times higher in your blood plasma at the end of birth than you have in an orgasm. So there you go.
This is such important information. Share it widely, and I think that's amazing. And we are talking about endogenous oxytocin. I know this isn't the remit for this particular episode, but I just want to say right now that you can't injected or exogenous oxytocin does not have the same effect because it doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier.
Yes, yeah, and that's really important to understand, and that actually, if we are interfering with synthetic oxytocin, what we get is that very strong increase in contractions, in their frequency, in their strength, and it reduces the duration between them if we've got enough oxytocin sensitivity receptor, which we touched on before. If we don't have that, then it's not going to work in the same way, and the labour's not going to happen, even when you're being induced with synthetic oxytocin. But what that synthetic oxytocin is not doing is creating that positive feedback loop. So you're not getting that increase in the brain, especially if you have an epidural. Okay, so epidurals block the pain and other sensations going up from the uterus to the brain, signals from the baby to the brain, it blocks those. So you are not getting increased endorphins, you're not getting the body increasing oxytocin. So when you have an epidural, it blocks that oxytocin peak. You don't get it. You also don't get it if you have an elective cesarean. And there are important, this cyclical increasing of oxytocin that's happening in labour is vitally important for bonding and functions happening in the body, changes in our brains that make us bond with our babies, that make us enjoy looking after our babies, that find it pleasurable. These are happening throughout labour. So if you have your baby birthed out of your abdomen before labour starts, it changes fundamentally the way that you are, the way that you interact with your baby, the way that you feel love for your baby, because that oxytocin peak hasn't happened, that oxytocin building hasn't happened. And it requires a huge amount of effort, of skin-to-skin contact, of breastfeeding for months and months and months to try to bridge that gap that has been created by interfering with these physiological processes. So, for example, were you to have skin-to-skin with your baby after a physiological birth for an hour, your oxytocin, again, increases tenfold in that time when the baby is on you, when they're on your oxytocin receptors on your chest, on your skin, when they're kind of pawing at the breast, when they're doing their little sweet wriggles, when they're like trying to find your nipple, where they're trying to stimulate that. That's causing more oxytocin feedback, and that increases by tenfold. If you've had a cesarean, or you've had an epidural, and obviously with a cesarean you have both, that doesn't happen. You don't get that increase in oxytocin when your baby's doing that. That mechanism is blocked, it's cut off. And actually they've shown that babies put on the skin of people who've had epidurals, had cesareans, they're more distressed. They cry. They're unhappy. They're not getting that same feedback mechanism. Your body isn't triggered to look after your baby in the same way. We have these amazing cells on our chest that they create heat for warming a baby. I actually had a wonderful story about a lady who had twins, and the two twins are quite different when they came out, and she had one twin on one side of her chest and one twin on the other side of her chest, and her chests were completely different temperatures side to side, just adapting to exactly what the babies needed. Like one needed more warmth than the other. And so when you disturb that mechanism, these things don't happen. It makes it less safe. Yeah, we're biologically designed to birth safely, to nurture our babies safely, to look after our babies safely. So before the 1960s, before artificial oxytocin was introduced, none of this disruption happened. None of this meddling happened. And we're all still here.
Yeah.
So do we really need 40, 50, 60, 70% of people's births happening with an interference? The answer is no.
Well, it's not improving outcomes, and it's worsening health for this generation of children that we'd like to think we're doing our best for.
Now, one thing that we didn't mention last time on the podcast that we sort of realised as soon as we stopped recording that we forgot to say is that one of the adaptations in babies, or quite a few adaptations that are happening in babies that we forgot to mention. There's just so much. This is the thing. This is why continuation. We're always going to be referring back to previous episodes, you know, compounding on the knowledge. I don't know if compounding is the right word. That sounds like a negative word. I don't know. Adding good to the knowledge, just building. In this building, we're going to be building an oxytocin amazing cycle for the orgasm of you loving and falling in love with physiological birth like we are.
I love how many times we've mentioned the word orgasm already in this episode.
It's just the right time of the month. I'm in the mood. So as we're coming closer to birth, the baby's thyroid is maturing, and that helps to clear the lung fluid. And we spoke a lot about that in the last episode, in episode 1, about how the changes in the lungs prepare that baby for life after birth. It also supports that temperature regulation. So that's something I've just touched on there with the oxytocin receptors in the skin. And it's one of the reasons why babies are taken away from mothers after birth if they're not able to regulate their temperature on their own. The trouble is, they're not designed to regulate their temperature on their own. They're not designed to be wrapped up, bundled up, like Katie James says, like a burrito with a hat on, away from the mother. What they're designed is to be skin to skin contact with you. And they don't need a hat. You know, we have research showing that actually a hat doesn't help thermoregulation when babies are in skin to skin contact with you. And babies release all kinds of wonderful substances, pheromones and things. And they have one that comes out of their head, which I love. It's called hex something or other. I don't know the numbers and, you know, letters after its name, but I love it because it's hex, like the baby's putting a hex on you. And they really are, because when you smell your baby's head after birth, it makes you fall in love with them. It increases your oxytocin. It increases your prolactin. It changes the way that you behave as a mother. It also changes the way that a male partner behaves. So it affects women and men differently.
It actually does. And grandmothers as well.
Yeah.
Like and you know, godmothers, beloved friends. If you try it, smell a fresh baby, your eyes will roll into the back of your head. So.
And it makes you more fiercely protective of your baby. It makes you not let anybody mess with you, not let anybody mess with your baby. What it does to male partners is it makes them more calmly protective. So it actually calms down male aggressiveness, makes them safer to be around your baby, makes them more nurturing and caring towards your baby. And that's something that my husband really describes after our physiological birth of our baby, that connection that he has with his son from his physiological birth rather than his children who didn't have physiological births. He said he can't describe the difference in that connection. And it's a source both of joy and incredible sadness that he can really feel. That connection is very, very different. And obviously he loves all of his children equally and really cares for them and built that bond over time. But it's different. The foundation of that bond is different because of that disruption that's happened. So, I mean, I suppose I'm saying this because I'm aware that people can feel upset if they've made a choice that has meant that it's then having long-term effects, and it can feel uncomfortable to hear that. And there are things that we can do to help bridge those hormonal gaps that we've spoken about a little bit already, touched on here. But the fact is they do happen. They are measurable. And so, like we were saying last time, choose wisely. Do you need to intervene? Do you need to disrupt your physiology? Or actually, can you just be in the moment? Can somebody provide you more support to help you cope with what you're feeling at this time? Can somebody be more loving? Can somebody rub your back? Can somebody bring you a hot water bottle? Can somebody just fill up a birth pool for you that you can sink into so that you can cope, so that you don't feel that you need to introduce things that are then having negative knock-on consequences? Yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't know if you were going to jump in and say something then. I thought I'd leave a pause.
I'm just very conscious that there is this resistance to difficult feelings and hard things. So when you're giving birth to another human, you can have hard things happen in that process. And I think it's having people around you that can make offers that are that are assisting the physiological rather than actively managing it. So,
Yeah.
like the suggestions that Shellie just made, like a rubbing of the abdomen, encouraging mothers to rub their own abdomens. There's so many different ways that you can bring comfort to yourself, that rather than somebody saying, would you like an epidural, or have this heroin, or let's speed things up a bit, without thinking about the wider picture. And so that's, really driving us to share these things with you about what your body actually contains and the way of the design, so that you actually can, well, if someone's offering you these things, you can say, no, can we try something else? Or you can choose carefully who you have around you at childbirth. And you can normally tell that by asking them, questions about previous births they've attended, and that should give you a good measure of what they're more likely to do. So
Yeah.
with regard to the brown fat, for instance, which we're going to talk about now, and Shelley's given you a real good lead up to all the reasons why it will be necessary, because we're talking about thermoregulation, but we're also talking about what is needed to nourish a baby in those first few hours and days as the baby and the mother are learning about the transfer of human milk from one to the other.
I was going to say also to supply energy during labour for a baby.
Yes,
Yeah.
100%.
So we
So,
spoke about that shutting down of the
yeah.
energy hungry cells in the brain, because the baby knows that, this is an innate knowing in the body, a preparation for birth, that it's going to be a hypoxic event. That when we have a squeeze of the contraction, it reduces the blood flow to the uterus, to the placenta, and to the baby. Okay? And we then have a gap between contractions so that those blood vessels can reperfuse, so the baby can be oxygenated again. But there are periods of time where there is hypoxia, and that's essential. We need that hypoxia to happen because it triggers catecholamine releases and things that mean that the baby are then prepared for extrauterine life. So it makes changes in the babies happen. That's helping their lungs to mature. That's getting, keeping energy in their brain, keeping the blood supply directed to their brain and to their heart, rather than going more peripherally in the body where actually it's not needed in the labour process. It's centralising that safety net of keeping the baby well.
This is why you'll also see that babies' movement patterns will often change just before labour and in labour, precisely because the baby has an autonomic system that is adapting to the impending labour. So when you pounce on a baby artificially, the baby's not had opportunities to make those adaptations, which means that the brain is more likely to experience harm in the labour process because it's being forced through a process it's not quite ready for.
Yeah. If they've not got those brown fat supplies, if they've not, if they haven't been able to put on enough brown fat in utero because they're being brought out early, if they've not had those changes in the lead up to labour happening that are closing those energy hungry cells down in their brain and getting them basically in a more relaxed state, ready for the stress of labour, it means then when you are forcing a process and you are increasing the strength of the contractions, reducing the time in between those contractions for recovery. You are disrupting the feedback mechanism that naturally in physiological birth slows the labour down if the mother's too stressed, if the baby's too stressed, if there's too much lactic acid building up in the uterus. All of these safety mechanisms are being bypassed when you introduce synthetic oxytocin, when you start the process early before the mother and the baby are ready, when you are forcing contractions to happen when actually the mother and the baby might need a period of rest to happen, rest and be thankful phase, or just a longer gap between a contraction for them to be able to recover and birth safely. And so you are bypassing all of the safety mechanisms that help to prevent hypoxic brain injury. And that's why we see an increase of it in induced labour. That's why you're told you need to continuously monitor, not, to make your baby safer. It doesn't make your baby safer in physiological birth. And actually, the monitoring only slightly makes it safer when the researchers only makes it slightly safer when monitoring, when you are messing with all these mechanisms. But you are introducing a lot of danger into the process that shouldn't be dangerous. And when you choose to have attendants at your birth who work in a hospital, whose a type of birth they see the vast majority of time is meddled with, is made more dangerous, they fear birth. They don't understand it. They don't understand the natural coping mechanisms. I went to a birth once. This mom was just doing amazingly. She was making these wonderful sounds. Her baby was coming lower and she was just breathing through the tract. She was in a good place. And this midwife came in and went, "Oh, you're not coping. She's not coping. Let's get her an epidural. You're not coping. Let's get an epidural." And the mum just sort of looked at me like, "I'm fine." And then she's like, "Oh no, you're definitely not coping. You need to have an epidural." It wasn't the mother that wasn't coping. It was the person coming into the space who, like you were saying, Kemi, about being able to sit with discomfort, being able to have that intuition and that communication with the person, being able to have built that bond up, which is why continuity of care is so much safer, because you've spoken with the person, you understand them, they understand you, they trust you, they feel safe to say to you, "Actually, this is really, I need some more help here. What can we do?" They might not even say that out loud because in labour our communication is diminishing, but with a look, they need something else. That between a contraction, you can say, "Okay, that seemed quite difficult for you. How about we try this? Does that feel nice for you?" And you try it for a next one. Someone who can respect that. And that's something I really see the disrespect of physiology. It just isn't respected because I suppose because people don't understand it, because they haven't learnt about it. Because for me, it is so sacrilegious. I can't think of a word that is strong enough to, express my rage. People talking in contractions, people saying, "Well, let's just speed it up by doing this artificial rupture of membranes, by putting the synthetic oxytocin in. Why don't you just have an epidural?" No, well, there's this list of side effects that we have on the sheet, like one in however many numbers, you might be paralyzed for life, and this, that, and the other. But there's no mention of this blocks the communication between your baby and your brain. This stops very important physiological processes happening in your body that mean you are going to care about your baby in a different way to how you would if we didn't do it. That's never mentioned. It makes me very cross. And then I get looked down upon, like I'm worse than the poo on the bottom of a shoe because I'm a doula, because of the arrogance that people think, "Well, I've done a degree, so I know better than you." It's like, well, not about physiological birth, you don't, evidently.
Not at all. Evidently.
Because otherwise you wouldn't be doing all the shit you're doing. So, okay, I just had a little rant. I'm just going to pause there and let you say something, Kemi, so I can calm down from my rant. I'm just going to regulate my nervous system.
Regulate your nervous system. But the reason why she rants is, honestly, I think what everyone's missing is that these have long-term effects on the health of the baby. So whilst we're making choices based on unresolved fears, irrational fears, trying to beat the minutest of odds that something may go wrong with the birth of a physiological birth, we're not bearing in mind, obviously there's a huge focus on the whole health of the mother ongoing, But I think we have completely forgotten that this is having an effect on the whole health of the baby that becomes a child, that becomes the adult, that then is going to want to have children of their own. This is why it's rant worthy. There's a bigger picture to this that almost everyone is missing. So, Shellie, rant away.
Yeah, and we touched on last episode, didn't we, about that research paper about how having this disruption of an induction affects the maternal depression and anxiety, and how that has long-term implications as well. So it's, the birthing is a dyad, and that also is not respected. That the mother and baby are one. They work together, they communicate with each other, they look after each other's safety. And by separating them out, by pitting them against one another, which is what often medical people do. Oh, well, you don't want your baby to be that 1 in 1,000 that dies, do you? Or your baby's suffering because of what you're doing right now. This is not what mothers and babies are doing. They're looking out for each other's well-being and each other's safety. And when the baby is in the uterus and the uterus is contracting and the lactic acid is too high, because you've had a really strong contraction to try to get the baby in a good position, you have a big gap to wait, to make your baby recover, to make your uterus recover. And all of this, there's this big kind of way that people are like, my body's not working, or my baby's ready, they need to be evicted. I need to make myself calmer, so I go into labor, I need to force it, I need to eat 6 pineapples, I need to have a spicy curry, I need to down castor oil to give myself the shits to make my uterus contract by irritating it. I need to have fingers stuck up there and waggled around to release unnaturally high levels of prostaglandins to get things started. All of this stuff is disrespecting that safety and that bonding, and it's quite upsetting for me in that way. And it's thinking about choosing people in your space and helping you to feel relaxed, because the safer and more relaxed you feel, the more that you'll get your fears and other people's fears out of the way, the safer your birth will be. Stepping aside from that safety and into safety is about removing that influence on it. And oxytocin is released with trusting interactions, with being in the dark. It's inhibited by bright lights. It's inhibited by cold. It's inhibited by difficult interactions. And the extent to which that happens is so significant, and it's minimized by the medical institutions. And I said this to Kemi a while ago, I keep meaning to make a reel about it on Instagram, because I thought of an example of what can demonstrate how much physically your body changes and how your nervous system changes by difficult interactions. So those of us who drive, that reverse parking, right, can be a little bit stressful. Even if you're good at driving, a reverse park, getting it right into a tight space can be a little bit tricky. But you might get a little bit sweaty under the armpits, but you can manage it. If you've got somebody there staring at you, and for those of you watching, I've just come in close to the camera. That won't work just if you're listening. But I've came close, peeking in through the window, going, I wouldn't do it like that. Just put that hand down a bit. Oh no, you're doing it wrong. No, left a bit, right a bit. Can you? If you imagine yourself in that situation now, I feel my armpits getting a bit sweaty thinking about it. And I'm just thinking about it. I'm just imagining that situation. This is what we're doing in labour when we say to people, come out of your home and into a hospital. Who feels relaxed in a hospital? I know there's some people out there that do, maybe that work there, but the rest of us don't. Hospitals are places for when you're sick. They're not a place that you think, oh yeah, I'd like to have an orgasm here. Yeah, I'd like to have a 20 times more powerful orgasm in this bare room with the funky smells and the bright lights and the machines that go beep. It's not natural. It's dangerous. That interruption is causing problems. And just something small like that is causing a big problem. So the bigger things are causing bigger problems. It's like knock-on effect of things.
100%.
So yeah. I'm going to circle back a little bit to just a few things that we kind of touched on last time, but a little bit more technical about this kind of lead up to labour as we're pushing over. So in the final weeks of pregnancy, the fetal membranes and the decidua, which is part of the myometrium in the uterus, begin secreting these chemical attractants that start to draw and recruit maternal white cells, so leukocytes, and also spark this inflammatory cascade that's happening in the fetal membranes. And that begins happening like 1 or 2 weeks before birth actually happens. So we might start to be getting signs. We might start to be getting more surges in the nighttime, more contractions. We might start to be getting more cervical weeping and fluid coming out of the vagina. We might start getting a little bit of a change in the cervix and releasing a little bit of the blood. So what the cultural thing about that is that people go, well, my body's not working. It's obviously ready. Why is it not kicking into labour? The point is all of those interacting mechanisms that we're speaking about are not yet at that tipping point, at that peak for it to work.
Yes.
So it's this interaction. We've got these hormonal shifts and changes. So the progesterone and estrogen levels, they don't sharply change at term. There's like an increase in estrogen, but it's not like a sudden ramps up. And the responsiveness of the myometrium, of the muscle cells in the uterus, does change. And there is this functional withdrawal of progesterone. So progesterone, it's a quiescent hormone. It creates quietness in the uterus. And it just like slowly steps back and away, with all these complex interactions, so that the levels of hormones in the body start to make changes, start to make the uterus contract a bit, start to make changes. But it's not until all of the things are in the right place and ready. So the baby's pressing down into the right part of the uterus and mechanically stretching those receptors in the uterus. When we've got enough sensitivity in the oxytocin receptors, when we've got enough oxytocin receptors, when our oxytocin levels are high enough, all these things interacting, when our prostaglandin levels have got high enough to make structural changes to irritate the uterus enough, it changes those contractions that we're feeling, those Braxton Hicks that we're feeling, from not dilating the cervix to tipping over to starting making changes in the cervix. And then once enough changes have been made in the cervix, for the cervix to start thinning. And then when we're getting more oxytocin and we're going in that cycle and we're getting more contractions, that it's starting to then cause the changes that we see in a transition, in a kind of gradual transition as we go into labour. And I've got a little demonstration model here, but I might just grow my baby a little bit more. It's not quite ready for birth yet. Just need to activate those.
We can wait.
We can activate those stretch receptors a little more. Okay. So we've got our baby nestling down to activate those stretch receptors. So those of you who are listening, I'm afraid you can't see my lovely demonstration, but if you join us over on Patreon, you'll be able to see. So we've got the baby nestling down, activating those stretch receptors. Okay. And before everything's ready, we're getting contractions in the uterus, but can you see that it's not actually changing the cervix? We're getting these prodromal labour. Sometimes that is trying to get the baby into a better position. And sometimes these can be quite strong. Yeah. And often they happen between 2 and 4 a.m. in the morning. And it's not just to annoy you and make you grumpy that you haven't had enough sleep, though it does, and make you frustrated. But the reason why that's happening is because melatonin and oxytocin are synergistic. They work together with each other. And actually melatonin increases the sensitivity of the oxytocin receptors quite significantly, to mean that they contract more in the nighttime. So that's why you often get this pattern of things starting in the night and then the day it disappears. It's not because your body's broken. It's because it's working exactly how it's meant to get your baby in the right position and to get you ready. And when things tip over and everything is ready, then when we start to get contractions, we're getting this drawing up at the top of the uterus. So it's drawing up like this. So rather than discordant things, we're getting a drawing up. And can you see that as we get that drawing up, we're starting to get thinning of that cervix. We're starting to get changes. Is it dilating yet? No, it's not dilating yet. It's changing. It's got a lot of changing to do. Remember that giraffe polar neck? Yeah, we've got a lot of jumper neck to alter before we get any further. And it comes down, and then eventually, when it's thinned out enough, we then do start to get dilating of the cervix. Okay? And then the baby can be born. I'm not going to pop this out because I'll make myself jump, but is that disappointment?
And a couple of things to add to that brilliant explanation. Honestly, Shellie, you're so good at this. Is that when the cervix is then shortening and starting to open, the mucus plug will be shed more. We've got that cervical weeping going on, because what keeps the cervix swollen and closed is edema. It's fluid within the tissues. So when all of that's happening with the shortening of the cervix, you might find more coming out into your knickers or onto a pad or whatever. But you can allow that, because that's your body responding to all the other changes, and you're actually seeing a physical outcome. It doesn't mean that the baby's going to be born today or tomorrow. It's just another sign of change. You should receive that as helping you build your trust in your ability to go from a cervix that is holding the baby in to a cervix that is prepared to let the baby out. These are all really, really good signs. And another thing I was going to say about the progesterone as well, Shelley's already mentioned, it means that smooth muscle, it is not as contractile. And you've also got smooth muscle in your blood vessels. So that's why you may often see a change in your blood pressure when all of this is happening. Unfortunately, those working with an obstetrics refuse to acknowledge that this is a sign of physiological readiness for birth. And they will often pathologize it and want to give you drugs and all sorts, and maybe even initiate an early birth. But there's a chance beyond which the changes that are happening to your blood pressure could affect whether you have a seizure or not. But we've got to have a bit more of a wiggle room for those changes, in acknowledgement of the fact that progesterone is reduced so that your smooth muscle can contract.
Yeah, and that ties in with changes happening in the structure and electrical preparation of the uterus in terms of the contractibility. So we get this increased gap junction formation between the uterine smooth muscle cells, which enables coordinated electrical coupling across the uterus. It enables those coordinated contractions. And, this ties in again that if you haven't got that coordination happening and you're starting a labour early, with mechanical methods, with prostaglandin release and cranking open the cervix. If those muscle cells are not able to contract in a coordinated way, it's not going to be able to get your baby to press down into the right part of the uterus. It might mean your baby ends up in a position that then they need help to be born, be that by a ventouse forceps, or they need to become out cesarean because they get so stuck because we're not getting that coordinated contraction. So all of these things are really important working together. It's not just one thing. You can't just increase prostaglandins and expect birth to work well. You can't just break an amniotic membrane and expect birth to work well. They're all designed to be together to make things safe and work really well. In that way, there are changes in the uterine lining, in the decidua, in the uterine lining, that help the onset of labour, and they think it is part of a programmed kind of activation of those inflammatory hormonal pathways of those prostaglandins that are working together. It's not from a placental clock. Your placenta doesn't just give up at 40 weeks, 41 weeks, 42 weeks. It doesn't just crumble and die. There is no evidence that this happens. So if anybody's telling you your placenta's past its due date, your placenta's going to fail, it's not true. It's not true. We can look for signs if there are issues with blood flow to a baby, okay? But we can't just blanketly say you're 41 weeks, your placenta's going to fail at a set date. We don't know where you actually are. Remember that your gestation is a guess. It's a guess based on either dates of periods, adding and minusing numbers in a complex formula, or a guess on an ultrasound by the size of your baby. And we know that sizing of ultrasounds is not very accurate. So it's a guess.
it's a guess, and also even with people that have had assisted conception, so have an implantation day, we still don't know that this particular baby wants to grow for this particular amount of days. So, you know, you might have a baby that requires 295 days of gestation rather than 280. So you really, I think the respect piece, like you mentioned earlier, Shelley, is a big piece of this, because if you're working with people that don't understand any of what Shelley and I are exposing in these podcasts, if they don't understand it is one thing, but if they actually think, oh well, yeah, I can imagine it being a factor, but I don't respect it, then you've got a problem, because there'll always be these suggestions that take you away from the physiology of childbirth, that bring in a level of anxiety that impedes the physiology of childbirth. So, you know, Shelley mentioned earlier, I just want to throw it in whilst I remember. I'm a bit senior, so it's going to have to happen when I remember. Is when you've got that rest and be thankful, for instance, so you've got this beautiful orchestra, you know, of how things are going to go, and all the internet connectivity of getting a whole human out of your body through a relatively small hole. All of that is working beautifully and autonomically. But then also you might find, if you're around the uneducated or disrespectful caregivers, is they'll see your rest and be thankful as a problem. So you might even get as far as full dilatation, but then find that you're unable to be supported towards a baby actually being born. And I get this from mothers as well, and they're saying, oh, the baby kept going backwards and forward and backwards and forwards, which I know we'll cover a bit more. You know, that's physiological. But if people around don't understand, they'll say, oh, maybe you need some more. Maybe we need to hang some synthetic oxytocin. Oh, your surges have stopped or reduced, or the gaps between them have widened, or they're shorter, which is your beautiful autonomic system working with you and your baby, so that your baby's brain can withstand the unfolding of your vagina and literally being pressed down towards your perineum. All of that is working beautifully between you and your baby. But the reason why we've got more brain injuries happening to children, even if they're not interfered with at the first stage, it's the interference that happens in the expulsive stage. It's the speeding up of that stage, which also provides many instances where the baby's having a hypoxic event beyond what they were prepared for.
Yeah. Yeah, and there was a study actually that Dr. Sarah Buckley has spoken about on sheep. And you obviously couldn't do it in humans, very mean to the poor sheep. Sorry, sheep.
Yeah.
But what they did was they occluded the umbilical artery. So they occluded the umbilical cord for periods of 5 minutes every couple of hours. Now, in a physiological birth where they weren't interfering otherwise, apart from doing that very cruel thing, the baby sheep were absolutely fine. They didn't suffer hypoxic injury from those quite significant periods of time of having occlusion. But what they found was, because physiology triggered gaps, triggered spaces, triggered the space that was needed for the baby to recover from that. But when they blocked that feedback mechanism, when they introduced synthetic oxytocin, so that the contractions are coming every 2 minutes, irrelevant of how the baby is, irrelevant of how the mummy sheep is, then we had the hypoxic injury.
Wow. I haven't seen that research. Thank you, Shelley.
And, you know, we saw it's, you know, I mean, not necessarily brain hypoxic injury is the only thing, but also they saw other things as well. Increased acidosis, increased oxidative damage, signs of stress, that the fetus was becoming more stressed. And
so ischemic damage, reduced blood flow to organs.
Yeah, causing problems. Wow. And you touched a little bit on this in terms of blood pressure and things like that, but I've written this down because it's a bit of a mouthful, so excuse me for reading from my notes here. But as parturition approaches, so as labour and birth approaches, maternal physiology undergoes a finely tuned transformation involving neuroplastic brain alterations, so our brain structures and our nerve structure is changing, endocrine amplification, so that's amplification of the hormone systems, including oxytocin, cortisol, estradiol, which is the precursor to estrogen, central and autonomic modulation of pain. Okay, so that's you feel more pain if you haven't allowed these processes to happen. Labour is more painful for you. And that has a knock-on effect of how long it takes, because if you have more pain, you release more beta endorphins, you release more adrenaline, and these slow down oxytocin. So it makes your labour longer, unless you're counteracting that safety mechanism by hammering your body with synthetic oxytocin, in which case it bypasses, never mind the trauma to your body of that pain, to of that to your baby who also feels pain. That's disrespected in there. And hemodynamic control. So as Kemi was saying, there are changes to hemodynamics. So your blood volume and your blood pressure, there are changes that are happening, all as part of the design. There's also cardiovascular expansion and resilience. So your body is gearing up for this marathon of birth for however long it takes. It may be short, it may be long, but it'll be the length that is designed for your body to be. Okay? You might have a longer, more spaced out labour where you have a strong contraction and a big gap, because that's what your baby needs. Well, that's what your uterus needs. There are reasons why things happen. It's not because your body's broken, it's because your body's trying to do it as safely as it possibly can. Collectively, these interwoven systems ensure effective uterine activation, circulatory stability, pain management, and maternal adaptation for childbirth and postpartum transition. It's as if your body is designed to have a baby and really perfectly sorting everything and putting it into place, and doesn't need to be meddled with.
I'd say. being as it worked efficiently for many hundreds of thousands of years without synthetic oxytocin, which has only been around for 50, 60 years.
Yeah, and how's our health now? Isn't it true that this generation is actually going to live less time than the previous generation? And I know that it's multifactorial. It's toxins, it's the crap that we're fueling our bodies with. But I think that there's this big thing that is dismissed, and like you were saying last time, that obstetrics is a moment in time, and actually the kind of remit of obstetrics is if we get that baby out, and as Dr. Stuart Fishbein says, get the baby in the bassinet, because the problem is then pushed on, and people don't look back to what these effects of interrupting and disrupting these hormones and these amazing things that are happening in the body are. We just have depressed mothers. We just have more babies with asthma. We just have babies with cognitive differences and difficulties. And it's just happening. No, it's not just happening. It's happening because we are messing with things and interfering with things, and we're not understanding it, and we're disrespecting the system. And, there's a few dedicated people like Kerstin Ulfnes, like Dr. Sarah Buckley, like Niels Bostrom, like I've suddenly forgotten his name, the lovely French obstetrician. What is his name?
Michel Odon.
Michel Odon. Yeah, all these people that are, thank you. That's menopause, my menopausal, very menopausal brain. It's going well. The very modern menopause is making us forget. But there's these amazing, dedicated birth nerds who are discovering all these fascinating things. And we know that research that tends towards physiology is ignored by the mainstream because it doesn't suit the industrial narrative of conveyor belting people through a system. When the NICE guidance was released, was it 2020?
For induction?
Yeah.
It was 2021.
21. So Hannah Darlin's research paper that showed the long-term effects of induction had been released at that time.
It had
And
been.
I know a lot of us were writing concerns about this NICE guidance,
Yeah.
about the fact it wasn't evidence-based for a lot of the recommendations. They were just on obstetric opinion. And the thing is, if you get obstetric opinion, all obstetricians see is meddled with birth. All
Yeah.
they see is birth that is going wrong. They don't see physiological birth. They don't understand it. They don't respect it. They don't know about it. They don't care about it. It's not their remit. And so if you are only getting advice from people who mess with things and thinks birth's dangerous, it very much skews the narrative. And this is what's happened with this NICE guidance, that they are starting to offer. And when I say offer, it's never like it doesn't seem to be, I won't say never because that's not true. There are some gems in there who are offering it in a good way, but it's a biased offering / coercion most of the time to fearmonger people into a very small chance of something bad happening, whilst ignoring the very high reality of differences that happen, that can't be avoided when you insert synthetic oxytocin, when you insert an epidural. These aren't like, this may happen 1 in 1,000 times. This happens to your body when you have it every time. 100% of the time, you are going to have effects on your physiology when you interfere with your birth. Not, I might have less than 1 in 1,000 chance of stillbirth, whatever gestation. So you are exchanging a purported safety and reduction in stillbirth that isn't actually happening for all these long-term effects for you. And I've in a perimenopause way forgotten what the point of my rant was.
Everyone understands. It's fine. There's just gems being dropped all over what we're talking about. And I'm just really grateful for the space to riff on this issue, because oh gosh, that might date this conversation a bit, but the Leeds have brought out the MSSP. So it's basically a report on all the things that have gone on to cause the harm and death to mothers and babies in Leeds. And so these reports, this then becomes timeless again, because we keep getting reports about the safety of obstetric care, but I want you all to realise they are just literally talking about obstetrics. So they're not going into the paediatric field to find out what the medium-term harms are or long-term. That conversation's happening here. But whenever, an obstetric report is being looked at, their only concern is who was maimed or killed in the obstetric window. But as those of us that care about children that become adults, that care about our society, we have to have a longer view than that. So it's like with the induction of labour guidance that was updated in 2021, again, what Shelley's describing is everyone was peering at the obstetric window and asking obstetricians who could only give an opinion based on consensus, and then producing something that is actually affecting the majority of women and people in this country. And so the conversation about physiology, we need to celebrate this. I think we've got some more to discuss on this matter. But look down your list. Have we covered everything about labour and the point of birth of the baby? Because there's a few things to discuss about the placenta and then breastfeeding, etc. So.
I mean, I've got some I've got some more things about different hormones and stuff that we can talk about. I think you speaking there reminded me what I was saying about that NICE guidance and how the guidelines have changed, but there is no new research.
That's right. It's based on consensus.
Yeah.
And
so
it's consensus of people that are obstetric minded.
Yeah.
So
people
they're not
who fear
thinking
birth,
the bigger picture.
People who get in trouble if there is a stillbirth, but don't get in trouble if there's a baby that comes out and is in the NICU. If a baby comes out and dies shortly after birth, that's then somebody else's problem. So really what the NICE guidance has done has caused far more problems and pushed problems onto other people rather than actually making things, outcomes, birth the whole health of mothers and babies better. And I and many other people raised huge concerns about the NICE guidance. I wrote a 30-point thing about it, highlighting issues that they had. Some of them were changed, like the fact that they were going to induce black women for no good reason
Well,
at all, just a racist nonsense.
black women are still being coerced. So they
Yeah,
changed it from the blunt instrument of, the hammering in the May 2021 stupid draft that everyone obviously threw their toys at the pram over. But they just changed it when you look at the actual NICE guidance and say,
should be
advise
offered.
black women that they need to stop being pregnant by 40 weeks. So, it's the
Yeah,
same thing.
advise them on our opinion, not
Yeah,
actually on any research that shows it's better. But
exactly.
advise them on our racist
Yeah.
opinion,
Yeah,
not on any.
let's not change the system from the racism, which is actually the reason why we were seeing the poorer outcomes. Let's not do that.
Yeah, no, don't want to admit that our institutional racism is a problem.
No,
Let's blame women for the
yeah,
colour of their skin, for their
yeah.
age, for their
Just
BMI.
stop being pregnant if you're black by 40 weeks. Just do it. Yeah.
Don't do it. I hope you all know that from what we're trying to say. Don't do it unless you or your baby's lives are actually in danger. And please speak to someone who's not an obstetrician. Okay, if you go in for one of these appointments and they're like, you need to have an induction, please book some time with me or Kemi to go over what information you have so that we can give you actual evidence. Because the number of times people will go in and say, well, I'd like to see the evidence, and they go, well, I don't have that.
Don't have it right now.
Don't have it. I had some clients where one day the obstetrician was like, your risk of your baby dying of stillbirth, it increases every second. Your baby could die at any moment. You need to have this baby out. We can book you in for an elective cesarean. We can do it now. Either that, or you can come in and stay here and be observed, and we can keep an eye. Like scaring them half to death. I spoke to them and said, that's just not true. They're just talking rubbish. But it got in their heads. And so the next day I met them at the hospital, and they did a CTG check. The baby was fine and happy. She knew the baby was fine and happy. She could feel the baby moving. She knew instinctively the baby was fine. But it got in their heads. The obstetrician actually said, you don't want to be that 1 in 1,000, do you? You don't want to be that 1 in 1,000 where your baby dies. And in the lead up to labour, as your oxytocin is increasing, it makes you want to connect and feel safe, and your prolactin levels are changing. It makes you fiercely protective of your baby. So if somebody says to you, if you do that, it's going to harm your baby, it triggers an emotional response in you that is different to if you are not in that state of your pregnancy. It is a form, in my mind, of manipulation of pregnant women to only discuss birth choices about where you want to birth, how you want to birth at 36 weeks, because you are more easily manipulatable, if that's a word. I might have just made up that word. But it means that they can go, oh, they can just tell you lies. Don't want to be that 1 in 1,000. Oh, it's safer to birth in the hospital than it is at home. No, it isn't. It's a lie. And your brain, somewhere in your brain, it triggers an anxiety. It makes you believe something. And like we were saying earlier about that people watching you when you're trying to park, if someone goes, oh, wouldn't do it like that, it creates stress in your body that has a knock-on effect that gets on your mind, that's sitting there and circulating around. And, it's intentional to funnel you down a path that feels safe for them, which may not be the path that feels right for you. And so with this stress, this couple were like, oh, Shellie, actually, I think we're going to go for the cesarean now. They were over 42 weeks gestation. I mean, her previous pregnancy, she'd gone over 42 weeks. It was normal for her. But they were like, oh, I know, we're a bit worried. Actually, this stress is getting to us now. We're worried that the stress of us being pressured by the hospital so much is causing more harm than if we just have this baby now. So can you meet us at the hospital? I meet them there. They do the CTG. The baby's fine. The obstetrician comes in and literally said, and I've done this on one of my reels on Instagram, and this is a point for me to say here, actually, all of the things that are said in my Instagram reels are from experiences of my clients or myself. So I don't make this stuff up. This kind of dark humour of where medical professionals are saying ridiculous things, they've all been said. This is all stuff that has happened. And this obstetrician was looking at their watch going, well, look, I'd rather be in theatre cutting than talking to you right now, like looking at their clock. No, the risk, from what they'd said the previous day, they then completely pivoted. No, the risk doesn't increase every day. It doesn't work like that. Because guess what? They were fully booked with cesareans that day. They didn't have space to
Wow.
cut them. The day before,
Wow.
so they were like, you need to cut, you need to cut, you need to cut. And then they're
Wow.
like, oh no, we don't have space today. You can just go
Wow.
away and wait.
Wow.
The risk doesn't increase like that.
Yeah.
So this is the kind of manipulation that's going on. And whether it's conscious or not, I'm not going to judge, because I'm sure that most medical professionals do not go in intentionally trying to harm people. I really hope for my sanity and well-being that is not the case. But the fear, the kind of perpetual like mob mentality.
Yeah.
The NHS mob mentality
exactly.
Is
I love the way you put that, and the addiction to control.
yeah. And surgeons want to cut. It's
That's
what
their
they live for. It's what they enjoy.
That's why they're doing it.
They don't want your baby to come out your vagina with no problems. They want to be
Yeah,
there.
because it's as if they're not needed then.
Preach! Do you know, it must feel really horrible. It must feel really horrible to not be needed if you don't respect and admire and just feel reverence for physiology. Do you know what I mean? Because I sit in a place of reverence of how birth works, how mothers and babies are, watching them. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. It makes me tear up, actually, about the amazing things that are happening, seeing that bonding, seeing that I did it, seeing that connection forming is just so wonderful. And I feel incredibly sad for obstetricians who don't see that. You don't see it in hospital. Birthing hospital is very different. They chose it, but I think they went in thinking that they wanted to save mothers and babies.
Yeah,
and you're right, the point is
how many years does it take for the penny to drop? You're not getting that in obstetrics.
No, well, they get the cognitive dissonance that they think they're saving babies, and that's the thing. Well, and this is the thing.
You can just look at the results. Just ask a question. Ask a question. Ask teachers, how many children in your class need support for learning? And then just sit back and listen. Yes. For an obstetrician, obviously they're in the realm of people coming earthside. I'd be interested. That's how me as a midwife found out what the effect of my profession was having on children. I just asked teachers, and they said, "Oh my goodness, there's so many children now requiring special educational needs. There's so many children coming into school that are still in pull-ups. There are so many children now coming out of, say, junior school that still struggle with reading and writing. Yeah. There's so much evidence out there that something's gone desperately wrong. There was he's double qualified psychologist and psychiatrist, perinatal. Came to find me one day when we were in a Yertata festival for mothers and midwives to come in for support and advice. And he came bounding in and he said, "Oh my gosh, there's just too much happening. There are too many women coming through with complex PTSD, all sorts of signs of birth trauma." He said, "What is happening at childbirth? What's going on?" And so we've got a meeting coming up where I will share with him what is going on. So other disciplines are seeing it. Osteopaths are seeing it. How many children are coming through with the knock-on effects of a birth that has been too long, too strong, asynclitic head, pressure on the neck, feeding problems, all the rest of it. So everyone else can see it. And if obstetrics, had more integrity, we would stop supporting hammering children through women we'd stop supporting it, we'd own up to the lifelong damage that we're causing, and we'd make a change. I always say, I know I sound a bit harsh, I've had beliefs that it's like, I've had beliefs that have been, I challenged myself and have woken up from, and they're quite laughable actually in my early days. I think all of us, we owe it to ourselves and to the future generation to do better. And I don't think we can keep making excuses for each other that we didn't know. Whenever we're doing something, we have to see the long-term effects of it. And if we're not interested in the long-term effects, then we're dangerous.
Yeah, and that really ties back into what we were saying about that isolation of that moment in time, of that removing of continuity of care, because it disassociates people from the effects of what they're doing later down the line, and that's very dangerous. And we're seeing that danger now in that there's just this cognitive dissonance of what somebody's doing that is then having a short-term impact, a medium-term impact, and a long-term impact. And it's, I truly believe, one of the reasons why continuity of care is so much safer, because people get the emotional impact of what they do and how that impacts people.
But Shellie, I've got to say, it's not a belief. It is evidenced. It is physiologically sound. You are aware that continuity of care works better for mothers and babies. It's not just a blind belief. Whilst, obviously I went into becoming a midwife for the women primarily because I wasn't seeing clearly the harm.
I wasn't seeing clearly.
I wasn't seeing clearly.
That's the best way to see life, isn't it?
Oh, I love it. I wasn't seeing clearly the harm that was being caused to babies. Once I just scratch the surface, I can see the harm that's being caused to babies. I've got to tell you, the obstetric field are incentivized to disrespect the birth process and to harm children and their mothers and walk away because they don't have to pay the price for it. So again, this is a really, us celebrating physiological birth in front of you is for you to ask more questions, maybe even get to that part of celebrating it yourself. But I've got to tell you that our lack of interest in medium and long-term outcomes is failing our children. And I would say that most parents do not want to intentionally fail their children. I won't say all, because there are some parents that are horrible parents, but the intention to do right by our babies means we're going to need to look at ourselves and the choices we're making. We're going to need to look at our courage. We're going to need to be thoughtful about our choices. It's not just about you. If you want to love your babies, you're going to need to start making your choices about them too.
Yeah, and choosing the safest path for you all. And that's why we're here. And you can join us for more information, for more delving into sitting in uncomfortable and difficult places until you find them comfortable, to delve into more learning and understanding so that you can make the right choices for you. So do come and join us over on Patreon. And with that, we'll wrap up, because I know Kemi's got a busy day of helping mothers and babies, and I do too. So thank you very much for joining us, everybody, and we will see you next time.
Bye.
Remember, you can join us over on Patreon for extra resources with every episode and a growing community of physiological birth rebels. This is The Revolution, and you're all invited. The information shared in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and should not be construed as medical advice. The views and opinions expressed by guests are their own and may not reflect those of the hosts. This content does not replace professional medical guidance.